Lynn Scholes was a 17-year-old freshman student at Middlebury College in Middlebury, Vermont. In December of 1971, Lynn was looking forward to her final exams of her first semester before Christmas break. On December 10, 1971, she was prepared to take her English drama class final and had studied hard for it. At 12:55 p.m., she left her dormitory with her friends to go take her exam, which was scheduled for 1 p.m. While on the way to the exam, Lynn mentioned to her friends that she had forgotten to bring her lucky pen and that she was going to go back and get it from her dorm room. This would be the last time her friends ever saw her. Lynn did not show up to take her exam, and her friends did not find her back in her dorm room. Her friends found this to be odd, but waited for her for 2 days before reporting her missing. Her parents were notified of her disappearance a week later. Her personal belongings, including her checkbook, identification, and wallet, were all left behind in her dorm room. During the police investigation, they found that on the day Lynn went missing, she was seen outside of a health food store called All the Good Things, eating prunes, just prior to meeting up with her friends to take the exam at around 12:30 p.m. During that time, she had reportedly mentioned to someone that she was going to New York, but that the bus had already left. Lynn then returned to campus, where she had that walk with her friends and reportedly claimed she left her pen back in her dorm room. Later that day, witnesses reported to have seen Lynn again standing at the same bus stop where she was seen earlier, around 2:15 p.m. This 2:15 p.m. confirmed sighting of her would be the last. Police at the time considered the possibility that Lynn had left of her own accord. Lynn had previously sent letters to her family stating she was homesick and was thinking of withdrawing from school. However, her friends and family said she was looking forward to going back to her home in Addison County, Vermont for the Christmas holidays, and they do not believe she would have run away. There were several sightings of Lynn in the days following her disappearance, but none of them were confirmed. The case would soon grow cold. Then, in 2015, a tip led investigators to link Robert Durst as a possible suspect in Lynn's disappearance. Robert Durst was the owner of the All Good Things health food store, the same store that Lynn was last seen eating prunes in front of. Moreover, the store was across the street from the bus stop where Lynn was also seen. Robert Durst is the prime suspect in his wife Kathleen Durst's disappearance, and is also a suspect in the unsolved murder of Susan Berman. He was charged and acquitted for the murder of Morris Black in 2003. He is also seen as a possible suspect in several other murders and disappearances, and his full sordid tale can be learned of in its entirety in HBO's documentary, The Jinx. Before the tip, investigators were unaware that Robert Durst had been the owner of the health food store All Good Things. However, there has been no concrete evidence linking him to Lynn's disappearance, and there has been no new information released to the public. The case remains unsolved. Anyone with information on Lynn's whereabouts or fate are encouraged to call Detective Chris Bodish, who can be reached at 802-388-3191. Sophie Toussaint de Plantier was a 39-year-old documentary producer living in Paris, France. Beautiful and intelligent, she captured the attention of anyone who interacted with her. The reddish gold of her hair offset her pale, porcelain-like skin. Her bright smile dazzled in the lights of the functions that she attended, and her stunning image was captured forever by the many cameras of the paparazzi who flanked the various premieres and high society parties she was invited to. Sophie was a single mother to her son from her previous marriage when she met Daniel Toussaint de Plantier. Daniel was a famous film producer and was well known in the French film industry. Sophie had met him at work and both got romantically involved in 1988. Daniel was 16 years older than Sophie and had been married twice before. But the couple bonded on an intellectual level with similar work interests and passions, and on June 18, 1991, Daniel and Sophie got married. Daniel lived a life filled with premieres and parties, while Sophie preferred a much more solitary and simple life. In her teenage years, Sophie visited Ireland several times and fell in love with the countryside. In 1993, Sophie bought a holiday home near Tormore, West Cork, in Schull, Ireland, to escape from her busy socialite life. The house she chose was extremely remote. It had no heating, no light, and its windows and doors rattled during windy days. She would often visit this secluded home with her son during the holidays. On December 19, 1996, Sophie decided to fly to Ireland for a holiday retreat. She asked a few family members and friends to accompany her on the trip, but no one was free as Christmas was just around the corner, so she decided to go alone. She arrived in Ireland on the morning of December 20th, 1996, and rented a car, a Ford Fiesta, to drive to her holiday home in Tumor, West Cork. She planned to stay there for a few days and then return to Paris for Christmas. On the way to her house, she stopped at a Texaco gas station to buy wood in order to make a fire. She then visited the Courtyard Bar in Schull and ate lunch between 3:30 p.m. and 4 p.m. before driving to her home. Upon arriving at her house, she talked to the caretaker of the home on the phone. The next day, she went into the town and bought groceries and then withdrew money from the ATM. She returned to her house at around 4:30 p.m. She was last seen outside of her house. It is believed that she stayed in the home for the remainder of the day. Later that evening, she called Daniel in France, but he did not pick up the call. However, he called her back at around 11 p.m. Daniel said they had a, quote, very convivial conversation, and Sophie did not seem to be in any way upset. The next day, on December 22nd, she visited the ruins of Dunlow at Three Castles Head. Later that day, she visited a friend and told her that she'd seen a woman at the ruins that had scared her very much. According to the friend, Sophie had said, quote, "Oh my God, I saw a woman, like a white shape." Locals believe that Sophie had actually seen, quote, "the Lady of the Lake." According to urban legend, the Lady of the Lake is a ghost that is said to haunt the castle ruins, and anyone who sees her will die within a few hours. The next morning, on December 23rd, 1996, at around 10 a.m., Sophie's body would be found in the laneway beside her holiday home. She was discovered by her neighbor, Shirley Foster. Sophie was found wearing a white top, lycra leggings, and a pair of boots. Her clothes were stuck in the barbed wire that bordered her home. She had been brutally murdered. She had numerous defensive wounds on her hands and her arms. She had been beaten severely around the upper torso and her head, possibly by a fire poker. She had suffered severe head and facial injuries. A concrete block was found at the crime scene, which appeared to have been used to drop on Sophie's head as she lay on the ground. There was a pool of blood around her body and bloodstains on the metal gate nearby. Looking inside the house, police found the home to be undisturbed. There was absolutely no sign of a break-in. Sophie's bed was not made, and 2 wine glasses were left to dry on the draining board by the sink in the kitchen, suggesting that someone had visited her that night. A fingerprint expert tried to lift fingerprints from the wine glasses and other objects in the home, but the results were negative. The expert could not find any other fingerprint except Sophie's. Strands of hair with blood on them were found between Sophie's fingernails, but a forensic analysis revealed it was Sophie's own hair and her own blood. Strangely, police couldn't find a single piece of DNA evidence at the crime scene. Police found the front and back doors of the home closed and latched. The heavy gate at the entrance of the laneway was wide open, although locals say Sophie usually kept it closed. Police believe that Sophie was attacked in her home, but that she escaped and ran outside, where she ran down the laneway and tried to climb over a fence, but became caught in the barbed wire. This gave her killer enough time to catch up with her and brutally murder her. Sophie's body was found near briars, and police believe that the killer may have been injured and could have had marks or scratches on his face and hands. In the next few days, police did door-to-door interviews of local people and handed out questionnaires related to the murder. A total of 50 suspects would be eliminated throughout the course of the investigation. On December 27, 1996, a local shop owner by the name of Marie Farrell told police that she had seen Sophie in her shop on the 21st of December, around 3 p.m. Marie said she also saw a man standing outside of her shop, wearing a very long black coat. She said that when Sophie left the shop, the man followed her. On January 11, 1997, police received a phone call from a woman using the alias Fiona. She told them that she had seen a man by Kelfada Bridge around 3 a.m. on the night that Sophie was murdered. Kelfada Bridge is just 2.6 kilometers from Sophie's home. The woman gave no other information and then hung up the phone. Police traced the call to a public phone booth. On January 20th, police issued an appeal for Fiona to contact them regarding the information about the man she'd seen at Kelfada Bridge. The next day, Fiona again called the police and told them about her sighting. The call again was placed from a public phone booth. On January 24th, police again received a call from Fiona to tell them that she could not meet them regarding the sighting. But this time, police traced the call and found it to have come from the home of Marie Farrell. Fiona was Marie Farrell, the shop owner who had mentioned that she'd seen a man in a long black coat following Sophie. She told police that she did not want to give a public statement because she was with another man on the night that she'd seen the man on the bridge and didn't want her husband to know. The man on the bridge, she said, quote, appeared to be in a drunken state and was waving his arms around. Later, she said she saw the man again in January at a local supermarket, and when she pointed the man out to police, they discovered that the man she'd pointed out was Ian Bailey. Ian Bailey is a journalist living in Skull, Ireland. He was born and raised in Manchester, England, and moved from England to Skull in 1991. Bailey worked as a freelance journalist and met a Welsh artist named Jules Thomas. Bailey moved in with Jules in Liscea, Skull. Reportedly, Bailey had a history of domestic violence towards Jules, and in 2001, he was convicted of assault. Bailey was the very first journalist to arrive at Sophie's crime scene. Bailey had gotten a call from an Irish Examiner reporter named Eddie Cassidy about a murder of a foreign nationalist at 1:40 p.m. Reportedly, Bailey and then Jules went straight to the crime scene, even though there were many foreign nationalists living in West Cork at the time. According to a witness, Bailey had actually told them around 11:45 p.m. that day that he was covering the murder of a French woman. Later, when asked how he knew that the victim was French, as it was not known to the media or the police at the time, Bailey said that Eddie Cassidy had told him that the victim was a French lady. However, when asked, Eddie Cassidy said he did not know the nationality of the victim at the time, and had only told him that it was the murder of a foreign nationalist. In the days that followed, Bailey wrote multiple articles on the case. In the articles, he provided details about the crime scene that were not known to the general public, and also alleged that the victim had had multiple male companions in France, and that it was possible that one of them had killed her. He seemed to steer the investigation from West Cork to France. Moreover, several witnesses reported to have seen Bailey with multiple scratches on his arms in the days after the murder. Bailey said that the scratches were from him cutting down a Christmas tree. He said that he'd climbed up to a pine tree and sawed the top off of it, and while trying to carry it down the tree, he got scratches on his arms. Bailey also had a scratch on his forehead, which he claimed to have gotten whilst killing 3 turkeys. On February 10th, Bailey and Jules were arrested for the murder of Sophie Toussaint de Plantier. He was questioned about his whereabouts and told police that on the night before the murder, he'd gone to a local pub with Jules and returned home around 12:30 a.m. He then claimed to have gone to bed and slept till morning. Initially, Jules corroborated his story. However, Jules later said that Bailey may have gotten out of bed about an hour later. Jules said that she then saw him in the morning at 9 a.m. and that he had a fresh scratch on his forehead. Bailey then claimed that he had gotten out of bed, but it was around 4 a.m. and it was to write an article for 30 minutes before returning to bed. Bailey and Jules were later released without any charges. A number of people would later come forward and report that Bailey had confessed to killing Sophie. On February 4th, a schoolboy named Malachi Reed had told police that when giving him a lift home, Bailey had said that he'd killed Sophie, saying that he, quote, went up there with a rock and bashed her effing brains out. In 1998, Bailey had been drinking with a couple, Richie and Rosie Shelley, when Bailey confessed to murdering Sophie, saying, I did it, I went too far. In 1998, Bailey was again arrested for the murder of Sophie, but he was released without any charges. In a 2003 libel trial, Marie Farrell gave evidence on behalf of the newspapers that showed that the man she saw on the bridge was Bailey. Marie said that she was then harassed by Bailey, and in 2004, Bailey threatened Marie with legal action if she did not retract her statement. In 2005, Marie retracted her statement and said that she was coerced by police to wrongly identify Bailey as the man she saw on the Keofata Bridge. In 2010, a French magistrate issued a warrant for the arrest of Bailey. However, the Supreme Court of Ireland refused to extradite him in 2012 and again in 2017. In 2019, a French court tried Bailey in absentia. Bailey was convicted of murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison on the 31st of May in 2019. Despite the number of arrests, Bailey has not been charged with Sophie's murder in Ireland, as there is no solid evidence linking him to the crime. To this day, Bailey swears on his innocence and lives in West Cork. The case remains unsolved. Sharon Christine Anderson, known to her friends and family as Sherry, 50, was a mother and dedicated member of the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services. She lived in Stanwood, Washington, a quiet town north of the Seattle suburbs. Sherry had 2 adult children and 2 grandsons whom she loved dearly. Sherry had been married to her husband, John, a Boeing employee, for about 6 years. According to Sherry's best friend Mary, the couple did not have any relationship issues, and if anyone knew Sherry, it was her friend Mary. Mary says that Sherry was like her adopted sister, and that the two talked on the phone every day around 9:30 p.m. before they went to bed. Sherry and her husband John were both fans of Harley Davidsons and rode motorcycles in their free time. Sherry filled her time by being a devoted social worker and a loving mother and grandmother. At the DSHS, Sherry worked with adult clients who were attempting to become independent after being on welfare. The job was challenging but also rewarding, and she'd worked there for 15 years. Coworkers reported that Sherry was dependable and hardworking. Sherry's youngest daughter had just graduated college, and she was very proud of her daughter's accomplishment. She also loved spending time with her daughter Nikki's 2 sons and spoke to them often. On December 2nd, 2000, Sherry had a full day planned. She needed to run some errands nearby her Stanwood home, and then she was going to travel south to Everett to go to the mall to do some Christmas shopping. She told her husband, John, that she would be back by 4 or 4:30 p.m. that day. Sherry and John had a night out planned that evening. At 5 or 5:30, they were going to leave their home and drive south to Seattle for dinner and a motorcycle show. Sherry left the house at around 9 that morning, driving her new SUV, a Toyota 4Runner, with only her purse and a coat. Sherry also reportedly always kept a gun with her for personal protection. This was a registered gun and kept in her car. According to Sherry's daughter, Nikki, Sherry's errands that morning included going to McDonald's for a coffee, something she did most days, going to Fred Meyer in Marysville to pick up some developed photos, and then to Walmart. Finally, she would drive up to Everett to go Christmas shopping. The drive from Stanwood to the mall in Everett is a distance of about 30 miles, and today, the drive would take about 30 minutes. It is unclear what Sherry's husband John was doing during that day, but in the mid-afternoon, he took a nap, and when he woke up, it was 5:30 p.m. He was surprised that Sherry had not woken him up. However, when he looked around the house, he realized that Sherry was not there and that her car had never returned home. At around 5:30 p.m., he called Mary and asked her if she had heard from Sherry. Mary had not heard from her best friend all day. Both John and Mary reported that Sherry was a very reliable person who always called when she was late, but she had not called that day. At that point, Mary, Sherry's daughter Nikki, and other family members began driving to the places that Sherry would have gone that day. At 10 p.m. that evening, Mary found Sherry's Toyota 4Runner parked in the Mervyn's department store parking lot at Everett Mall. The car was parked only about 50 feet from the entrance. However, there were no Christmas presents in the car, and alarmingly, Sherry's cell phone and the gun she carried for protection were both found inside the locked vehicle. At this point, Sherry was reported missing to the Everett Police Department, and while the SUV was accounted for and verified as hers, no further leads were gathered that were publicly released. Volunteers in groups of 10 to 80 people scoured the area around the mall, as well as nearby roadways, parks, bodies of water, and railroad trusses. But no sign of Sherry was ever recovered. Reports differ on whether or not police believe foul play was to blame in Sherry's case, with some newspapers reporting that Sherry's disappearance was suspicious and foul play was likely, while other media outlets report that foul play is not suspected, and still others say that the police simply do not have enough information to point them in either direction. Friends and family have kept Sherry's story alive and have printed thousands of missing persons flyers, which have been posted all around the Seattle area, especially all around Snohomish County. Police have remarked that they are impressed by the determination shown by Sherry's friends and family to find her. Because of the missing flyers, police frequently get reported sightings of Sherry, although most of them have led back to a local woman who looks similar to Sherry. Many reports claim that there is a website dedicated to Sherry's disappearance, however, it does not seem to be in operation currently. According to one account, it is not believed that Sherry actually made it to the mall that day, but rather that something happened to her before she got to the entrance, between her car and the mall. CCTV footage was unable to be acquired, and it's unknown why police chose not to procure the footage before it was automatically deleted. Mary says there is reason to believe that Sherry's car was abandoned in the mall parking lot between 6:30 and 7 p.m. that day, about 3 hours before the car was found. In a different report, police claims that no one saw Sherry that day after the morning hours, and say that the last confirmed sighting of her was when she left her house that morning at 9 a.m. in Stanwood. Because information on this case is sparse, it is unknown if Sherry ever made it to Fred Meyer or McDonald's that day. It is also unknown exactly when her credit card, bank account, or phone was last used, and whether it was on the 1st or the 2nd of December. Friends and family are certain that Sherry would not have walked away from her life. She had no large debts, no marital or criminal problems, and had never given any indication that she was depressed or otherwise wanted to run away from her life. Moreover, Sherry's credit cards and bank account have not been touched since the day that she went missing. Any hope that Sherry was alive waned when the holidays came and went without her making contact. Mary and Nikki both call the county coroner's office whenever an unidentified body has been found, hoping that perhaps at long last Sherry has been found, and with her, answers long awaited. But so far there have been no matches. The sister and best friend of Sherry also check local pawn shops for Sherry's distinct wedding set. Her wedding ring was a custom design. In the middle is a white diamond, flanked by black onyx. The stones are set in white gold. Sherry's ring has never been recovered from any pawn shops nor jewelers. Sadly, in the years since she disappeared, nothing more has been revealed. About 1 year after Sherry's disappearance, John filed for divorce, saying that he needed to move on with his life. Very little information is available about what John was doing that day, and at first glance, he seems like a viable suspect, according to some close to the case. However, there has been no reporting to indicate that he is being pursued as a suspect, and Sherry's family members and friends have never made any negative remarks or pointed fingers at John. Those following the case say it is hard to determine if John really is a suspect, but as he has not been further investigated, it is possible that he had an alibi or was ruled out by some other measure, not released to the media. In fact, the only person Mary is suspicious of is a client who had specifically threatened Sherry 2 weeks prior to her disappearance. Mary maintains that this person has never even been interviewed by police. Sherry is featured in a deck of cards given to inmates in Washington jails and prisons. She is on the 8 of clubs, and it is the hope of family and friends that the deck may generate interest in the cold case, although no leads have come from this yet. Sadly, at this point in time, Sherry remains one of the approximately 4,000 missing or murdered Indigenous people whose cases are not yet solved in this country. Sherry is described as a biracial woman. She is Caucasian as well as Native American. She is a registered Cherokee Indian. She has long brown or black wavy hair which extends down her back and brown eyes. She is about 5'8" and weighs around 130 to 150 pounds. In the year 2000, she was 50 years old. Sherry was last seen wearing white tennis shoes, a green coat, blue jeans, and her distinctive custom-designed wedding rings. She may use the last name Saban. Many critique the fact that police have taken the husband's word on if Sherry ever actually left the house to begin with. As most female murder victims are killed by their male partners, it's understandable that many wish investigators would pursue the husband, more so in their continued investigation. Additionally, when discussing the case, John has been chided for using terms like move on as soon as 1 year after Sherry's disappearance, which some say is indicative of him distancing himself from her. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Sharon Christine Anderson, please contact the Everett Police Department at 425-257-8483. There is currently a $20,000 reward for information which leads to her return. It was Christmas time morning in 1929 when Fanny Lawson and her 6 children were brutally murdered. Victims of gunshot wounds and bludgeoning, they were found on their tobacco farm in Stokes County. The case was all but closed when the father, Charlie Lawson, shot and killed himself as first responders arrived on scene. However shocking Charlie's death was, it was nowhere near as brutal, disturbing, or horrific than what first responders would find on the Lawson property. The aftermath of a crime scene that told a story of holiday horror so brutal and so shrouded in fatal familial secrets that it would take more than 60 years for the tragic and twisted truth to finally come out. Earlier that week, in a strange and highly unusual move, Charlie Lawson decided to take his family into town to have their photos taken in a professional studio. The son of a sharecropper, Charlie Lawson saved up money to buy a 200-year-old farmhouse and surrounding land on which to raise his family and grow tobacco. The working-class farmer, who was not well off at all, surprised the family further by purchasing new clothes for his wife as well as their 4 daughters and 3 sons. These clothes were to be worn in the mysteriously planned photograph, which remained as a morbid artifact of the family's legacy. In the photo, the entire Lawson family is standing in 2 calm and eerily serious rows. Standing in the back row was 16-year-old Arthur Lawson, his older sister Marie, 17, and their parents, Fanny and Charlie, with Fanny looking morose and holding 4-month-old Mary Lou. In the front row of the photograph, the youngest of the Lawson brood, James, 4, Mabel, 7, Raymond, 2, and Carrie, 12, scowled at the camera. No specific cause has ever been provided as to why Charlie initiated this professional photo, but days later, nearly everyone in the picture would be dead. In the early hours of Christmas afternoon, the eldest daughter, Marie, baked and iced 2 layers of a cake that was to be the finishing touch of the Lawson family Christmas celebration at their farm later that day. Around that time, the 2 middle Lawson girls, Carrie, age 12, and Mabel, age 7, left to go visit their aunt and uncle's house. But in a repulsive and cowardly act unbefitting of any father, Charlie stood behind the tobacco barn that was on their property, lying in wait with a shotgun for the two girls to pass by. After shooting his daughters at point-blank range, the so-called father bludgeoned the 7 and 12-year-old to ensure death and stowed their lifeless bodies inside the barn. Charlie subsequently returned to his family home where his wife, Fanny, 37, was sitting on her porch. Charlie shot his wife and then went into the house where Marie was finishing her cake. Charlie shot Marie while her panicked two younger brothers, mere toddlers, James, age 4, and Raymond, age 2, ran and hid. After hunting down his sons, he turned on the infant. Nobody survived. Investigators would find the remains of the 6 children and their mother, Fanny, arranged on the ground outside, with their heads propped on rocks and their arms crossed over their chests. In a strange and unclear exception, the eldest son, Arthur, age 16, had been sent by his father on a specific errand the evening before the brutal and senseless killings, thus sparing his life. When Arthur returned home from his errand to find the terrifying scene, he alerted neighbors who began to gather. Being that it was 1929, the police were not able to be called as instantaneously, and so a small crowd of onlookers had gathered at the scene before first responders could. Charlie, whose whereabouts were unknown to the gathering crowd, then took his final shot, this time aimed at himself. His only remaining son, Arthur, and a police officer who was called to the scene, found Charlie's body along with letters he had written, seemingly suicide notes, which, although they are no longer able to be found, are said to have not made any explanation in terms of motive. Investigators noted that a tree that was nearby to the murderer's body had the markings of footprints around it, as if somebody had been pacing. The funeral, attended by many, was poignantly and powerfully morbid in its arrangement. White coffins of various sizes stood propped up on stands, all lined up in a row. By the size of the coffin, it was evident which housed the youngest victims. Furthering the pain of loved ones still reeling with the death of Fanny and her 6 innocent children, Charlie's brother, Marion Lawson, seemingly a bit of a monster himself, opened the now departed family's farm home on Brook Cove Road to tourists interested in the morbid crimes that had taken place there on Christmas Day. Horrifyingly enough, and in a tactless display of callousness, the killer's brother Marion chose to display the cake that the eldest daughter, Marie, had been making for Christmas Day. The 2-layer cake, baked in the early morning of the holiday, was, unbeknownst to Marie or her family, the last thing that she would make in her short life, which would span only 17 years. The cake was eventually covered beneath glass by the killer's greedy brother, turned House of Horrors tour guide, because onlookers were plucking the raisins from it to keep as souvenirs. This tourist attraction remained as a morbid remnant of simpler times for the Lawson family, but sources close to the family, who had kept quiet for so long, revealed that the family may have not been so happy as the rest of the world had thought prior to the atrocities. Although technically the murderer was already known, Charlie Lawson had all but admitted it by committing suicide in such a public way, the actual motive behind the killings was unclear and on the minds of many for decades to come. No more so than on the minds of Bruce Jones and Trudy Smith, a father-daughter investigation duo. In 1990, after years of painstaking investigation, they were set to publish a book on the murders when something extraordinary happened. Stella Lawson Bowles came forward after 61 years to tell a startling secret. She confessed that prior to the murders, she had overheard a discussion between Stella's own mother, Jetty, and Fanny's sister-in-law, as well as Fanny's aunt. In this conversation, Stella overheard that Fanny Lawson, the mother of 6 children at the time, with her 7th born only 4 months prior to her death, had confided to relatives that she had been concerned about an incestuous relationship between her husband, Charlie, and her eldest child, Marie. Because we know that Stella's mother, Jetty, died in early 1928, and the Lawson family was murdered at the end of 1929, the fact that this conversation happened almost 2 years prior to the murders shows that this was a concern long held by Fanny, and not just an early inkling of concern. Further evidence to stipulate to this disturbing fact was produced in a true crime book, where a neighbor of the Lawsons claimed that he was aware of some serious problems going on within the family, but he refused to give more details. Another neighbor, Sam Hill, claimed that he was aware of the fact that Charlie had forced himself upon his eldest daughter. The neighbor alleges that when Marie told him of the pregnancy, he swore her to secrecy, saying that if this vow of silence were to be broken, quote, there would be some killing done. Then, in 2006, right before the manuscript was set to be published, a close friend of Marie Lawson's, Ella May, finally revealed that, a few weeks before the massacre, Marie opened up and told her that she was pregnant and that the father of the baby was her own father. Ella May recalls that, while they were having a sleepover with each other, 17-year-old Marie confessed that both her mother and father were aware of this incestuous pregnancy. No evidence of pregnancy was apparent, but scientific progress at that time did not allow for pregnancy tests in the same way that we can test victims of crimes today, and so these dark and shameful secrets were not revealed until decades later. Some apologists for Charlie say that the fact he had sustained a head injury a few months prior to his murderous rampage proves that it was not in his nature to kill. However, an autopsy and further analysis of his brain at Johns Hopkins Hospital found no evidence to support this theory. No other credible explanation, besides Marie and Charlie's pregnancy secret, stands as to why Charlie chose to end the lives of 6 of his children and his wife. His son, spared seemingly purposefully from the attack, married and had 4 children of his own, but the Lawson family's curse would continue to affect Arthur as he eventually perished in an automobile accident in 1945, leaving his children, fatherless as he had been, alone with their widowed mother. Charlie Lawson was buried in the same cemetery plot as the innocent family he viciously and brutally massacred on Christmas Day. The grave, intimidating and overbearing in its size, owing to the fact that it has the information of 7 people on it, towers over the cemetery as a not-so-subtle reminder of the past tragedies of the Lawson brood. The gravestone inscription reads, mysteriously, "Not now, but in the coming years it will be a better land. We'll read the meaning of our tears, and then sometime we'll understand." On Christmas Eve in 2008, in Covina, California, a quiet suburb of Los Angeles, 9 people were brutally murdered at what was previously a happy holiday party located at 1129 East Knollcrest Drive. Wearing a Santa suit, 45-year-old Bruce Jeffrey Pardo entered the house at approximately 11:30 p.m., pushing a cart laden with 4 13-round capacity semi-automatic handguns. Bruce also carried with him a large wrapped Christmas present, which was actually a flamethrower he had fashioned himself. Dressed as Santa Claus, Bruce entered the home much to the excitement of his 6-year-old niece, Katrina, who gleefully ran up to greet him at the door. As she rushed to greet her uncle, he grabbed one of the handguns and promptly shot the innocent 8-year-old in the face. In response to this senseless act of violence, some partygoers came to the aid of the 8-year-old, while others fled for their lives. Bruce continued to fire indiscriminately at the panicked people left in the room, as well as those who were trying to escape. After firing for an unknown amount of time, Bruce set down his guns and then proceeded to unwrap the morbid Christmas present that he had brought, a homemade flamethrower made with racing fuel. Spraying the racing fuel all over the home, he then set the high-octane gasoline on fire, which quickly turned the house into a blazing inferno. A 20-year-old woman suffered minor injuries when she jumped out the second-story window of the now-on-fire house to save herself. A 16-year-old was shot in her back but survived. The young child who was shot in the face would miraculously survive her serious injuries, but 9 other people in attendance were not so fortunate. Based on some of the injuries, investigators speculate that Bruce killed some execution style while standing over their bodies. One survivor of the massacre was able to escape the home and run to a neighbor's house to call the police. The ensuing fire's flames reached heights of 40 to 50 feet and took nearly 80 firefighters to put out. This was due to the type and sheer amount of accelerant used. Due to the intensity of the flames, the bodies of the victims were unable to be recovered until after the house had been extinguished. Due to this unfortunate circumstance, the victims had to be identified by dental and medical records. Once the house was able to be entered and the victims recovered, it was discovered that Bruce had shot and killed his ex-wife of only 1 week, Sylvia Ortega Pardo, her maiden name was Orza, age 43, as well as his now ex-mother-in-law, the mother of Sylvia, Alicia Ortega, who, at 70 years of age, received fatal gunshot wounds to the stomach. Bruce also turned the gun on his father-in-law, who died of multiple gunshot wounds to various parts of his body. In addition to those who died of execution-style gunshot wounds, 6 others died from the ensuing fire and smoke inhalation. Charles Ortega, 49, Sherry Lynn Ortega, 45, James Ortega, 51, Teresa Ortega, 52, Alicia Ortega Ortiz, 46, and Michael Andre Ortiz, Bruce's nephew, only 17 years old at the time of his death and the youngest victim of the Christmas massacre. In addition to the 9 murder victims, 2 children lost one parent, and an estimated 13 children were tragically orphaned as a result of these heinous murders. After his reign of pain and chaos, Bruce calmly got out of his Santa suit and into his street clothes, which he had packed ahead of time. He then got into his rental car, a Dodge Caliber, and drove to the house of his brother, who was not at home at the time, in Sylmar, California, about a 30-minute drive from the crime scene. It was in his brother's home that he made the cowardly decision to take his own life and died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Because the cheap polyester fabric of the red and white Santa suit had partially melted, adhering to his skin, the suit was never truly taken off, and remnants of the false holiday cheer would be found adhered to his skin long after death. His body was found with $17,000 in cash wrapped in a girdle attached to his leg. His rental car was parked 1 block away from his brother's home, and it had been seemingly booby-trapped so that anyone who attempted to touch the remnants of the Santa suit or anything else in the car would perish in a fiery blaze courtesy of black powder, a temperamental explosive. Seeing the threat for what it was, the bomb squad was able to shoot an incendiary device into the Dodge Caliber, which destroyed the imminent threat but also destroyed precious evidence that may have answered some of the investigators' questions. The 4 semi-automatic handguns that he had brought with him to the Christmas party were found near Bruce's lifeless body, packed with at least 200 rounds of ammunition. While police initially thought that Bruce had plans to flee to Canada because of a ticket he had purchased from Air Canada in the days leading up to the attack, it was later discovered to be a domestic flight that would have taken him from LA to Moline, Illinois. It was discovered that Bruce had called an old friend of his from high school to tell him that he would be visiting in the next few days. He had previously visited this friend back in October of 2008, but as Bruce took the cowardly way out prior to the flight, we will never know if this supposed trip was a red herring or if his plans simply changed after his senseless killing of 9 people. Back at the residence of Bruce Pardo, officers found what they described as a virtual bomb factory. It contained, in addition to various explosive materials, as well as the empty high-octane fuel container, empty boxes of 5 semi-automatic handguns. It is unclear if the 5th handgun was ever recovered, and also had a Benelli M2 tactical shotgun. A prior student of John H. Francis Polytechnic High School in Sun Valley, Los Angeles, and a graduate of Cal State Northridge, the would-be killer had worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in La Canada, Flint Ridge. He had met his soon-to-be wife back in 2004, 4 years prior to the massacre. After a less than 2-year-long courtship, the couple wed in January of 2006, but marital problems arose almost instantly. The marital issues described by those closest to the couple surrounded the issue of finances. Bruce refused to open a joint account with his new wife, Sylvia, and expected her to pay for all the expenses of her 3 children from a previous marriage, all on her own, without the help or support of her new husband. In June of 2008, less than 2 years after the couple had married and just 6 months before the tragic Christmas killings would occur, Los Angeles County Divorce Court ruled that Bruce needed to pay Sylvia $1,785 a month as spousal support. Bruce, to his dismay, was also made to pay a one-time payment of $10,000 to cover Sylvia's building a new life, separate from him. The courts, using an algorithm which took into account Bruce's current income and previous tax returns, calculated the spousal support number objectively. But unsurprisingly to those who knew him, Bruce thought that this government-ordered aid to his wife was patently unfair and morally unjust. 1 month later, he would be fired from his job. The reason is not known, but he was at fault and not simply laid off. Sources close to the family say Bruce was irate that his soon-to-be ex-wife was receiving spousal support when he believed she didn't actually need it. He angrily claimed that she was living with her parents rent-free and was using the money that he gave her lavishly and irresponsibly, with Bruce claiming that she was using it to buy a luxury car, spa treatments, golf lessons, and multiple trips to Las Vegas to gamble. With little to go on in terms of murder, investigators honed in on the recent divorce between Bruce and Sylvia, as it had happened just 1 week prior, on December 18th. Some people close to the family speculated that Bruce had concealed from Sylvia the existence of a child from a previous relationship. That child was, strangely enough, severely injured from an accident which had happened in a swimming pool. No publicly accessible information surrounds this unusual injury, and there's no information as to whether Bruce may have been responsible for that misfortune as well. In July of that same year, Bruce had been fired as an electrical engineer from ITT Electronic and Radar Systems. No further evidence was found to explain the motive of the so-called Santa shooter, and this crime lives in the minds of many as countless living victims of Bruce Pardo's evil still suffer today. Christy Merc. Christiane Merc was a 25-year-old schoolteacher living in a 3-bedroom townhouse with her female roommate in East Lampeter Township. On December 21st, 1992, Christy woke up to get ready for work. Her roommate had already left for work. As she was about to leave her apartment, a man grabbed and shoved her back inside her apartment. At 9 a.m., when Christy didn't show for school, the school principal, Harry Goodman, called her home. But no one picked up her phone. He tried to call her again a few minutes later, but got no reply. As Christy's home was close to the school, Harry decided to check up on her. When Harry arrived at the house, the door was slightly ajar. When he pushed it open, he found Christy laying dead on the floor. She had been severely beaten on the head and the neck, strangled by hands and clothing, and sexually assaulted. He immediately notified the police. Police determined her time of death between 7 a.m. when her roommate left for work and 7:45 a.m. when she usually left for work. There was no sign of forced entry, and Christy had been beaten with an object sourced from inside the house. DNA in the form of semen was collected from the crime scene. Investigators said Merc either knew her killer or opened the door expecting to see someone else. There was suspicion around a man, 20 years her senior and married, who had showed up at the elementary school with flowers for her the day after she was killed, and told school officials he didn't know she had died. He turned out to be Christy Merc's secret boyfriend, but was also later cleared. In the years following Christy's murder, little progress was made in the search for her killer. A description of the suspect was released to the public. Police said they were looking for a man seen parking a medium-sized car across the street from Merc's home and walking towards her home. They described him as a muscular white male driving a white car, a 1993 Dodge Shadow convertible, a 1999 Dodge Daytona ES, or a Toyota. However, no new leads were found. The police interviewed over 1,500 different suspects, but found no leads. About 60 men were eliminated as suspects using forensic testing. 25 years after the case went cold, in March of 2017, police decided to send the semen samples found at the crime scene to Parabon Nano Labs, a company specializing in DNA phenotyping, which is a technology used to predict an individual's appearance based on their DNA sequence. By November of 2017, Parabon had produced approximate images of what Christie's killer would have looked like at ages 25, 45, and 55. According to the laboratory findings, the killer was likely 3/4 Caucasian and 1/4 Latino, with fair skin and brown or hazel eyes and brown or black hair. The sketch was circulated in Lancaster County, but the police could not find any clues regarding the killer. Then, in 2018, Parabon submitted the DNA sequence recovered from the crime scene to the database GED Match, which compares DNA sequences to find possible relatives and ancestors of an individual. In May of 2018, Parabon notified investigators that they had found a highly significant match to the DNA sequence on the GED Match database. The individual whose DNA matched was likely to be a relative of Christy Mirac's killer. Investigators soon zeroed in on 49-year-old Raymond Rowe, who lived just 4 miles from where Christy had lived at the time of her murder and would have been 24 years old in 1992. Rowe was a father who had been married 4 times and was a regular churchgoer. He was also a DJ at both small and large clubs and was a minor celebrity in Lancaster County. He went by the name DJ Freeze and was the owner of his own company, Freeze Entertainment. He also ran his own DJ school and DJ equipment rental store. On May 31st, Raymond Rowe was DJing at a local school dance. Investigators went undercover at the function, and once the event came to an end, Rowe threw away a water bottle and a piece of chewing gum, which investigators retrieved. The items were collected and rushed to a state police crime lab for DNA testing. It was later found that the DNA on the objects matched the DNA found at the crime scene. On June 25, 2018, Raymond Rowe was arrested and sent to jail. Raymond Rowe eventually admitted he raped, strangled, and killed Christy Mirac on December 21, 1992. But he did not explain why. Neither have prosecutors. Rowe pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, rape, and burglary. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Patrick Warren and David Spencer. On the evening of December 26, 1986, just one day after the Christmas celebrations, Patrick Warren and David Spencer were out on a late-night stroll in Chelmsley Wood on the outskirts of Birmingham. Warren and Spencer were riding Patrick Warren's brand new red bicycle, which had been a Christmas present. The boys had been spotted by a police officer earlier that afternoon, playing with another group of children in Meridian Park, where they had been warned by the officer to not play on the frozen pond. After returning home, they told their parents of their plans to visit one of Patrick's brothers that evening. Derek Warren, another brother, went looking for them the next day when he found out that they had never arrived. The last known sighting of the boys was just after midnight by a petrol attendant who gave them a packet of biscuits. Patrick Warren's brand new red Apollo bicycle was found abandoned by the petrol station near the trash bins. The petrol station attendant said they saw the boys walking towards the local shopping center. That would be the last time that they were ever seen alive. Soon after, the children were reported missing. Officers still speculated to reporters that the boys were playing some big game, or that they were simply staying with friends. They were not taking the missing children seriously. Police offered €500 to anybody with information, believing that whomever the boys were staying with would quickly give them up. But no one called in any viable leads. In an effort to raise awareness, the supermarket Iceland utilized the techniques of an American ad campaign, which placed the pictures of missing kids on the backs of milk cartons. This would make the faces of David and Patrick present in 770 stores across England. However, no tips were ever proven to be credible. One major possibility is that Brian Field, who was living mere miles from where the boys went missing, was somehow involved. He would have most likely utilized the same petrol station at which the boys were last seen. Brian Field was later convicted of the murder of a Surrey schoolboy, Roy Chittill, which happened in 1968, but with no bodies and no direct evidence leading to him, Fields has never confessed or even been a prime suspect, largely because he was never investigated. All of the sex offenders in the area were questioned but ruled out. To date, the boys have never been found. Families' houses have been searched and investigated. The property of Brian Fields has been investigated as well. Rewards have been offered, ponds have been drained. There are no leads. The police consider this a no-body murder.
Leslie McCrae was a 17-year-old student living in an apartment with her boyfriend on St. John's Avenue in Jacksonville, Florida. Leslie was studying at the University of North Florida and dreamed of becoming a model. On Christmas Eve of 1985, around 3 a.m., Leslie's boyfriend woke up to find a man with short brown hair kneeling by his bed. The man was holding a knife in his hand and tied Leslie's boyfriend's hands and feet using neckties. He then tied Leslie up and took her with him against her will out of the apartment through the back door, leaving Leslie's boyfriend tied up in the bedroom. Her boyfriend eventually freed himself and called police at 6 a.m. Unfortunately, a few hours later, Leslie's nude body would be found by a passerby along Old Middleburg Road near Interstate 295, 5 miles from her apartment. She had been sexually assaulted, beaten, and stabbed multiple times in her head, chest, and neck. According to the Florida Times-Union newspaper, the police found no sign of forced entry or a struggle in the apartment. Police were unable to find any clues at the crime scene that could lead to a potential break in the case, and with no leads and no suspects, the case would grow cold. However, over the years, her family did not give up hope on finding justice. In 2019, her family reached out to Project Cold Case and asked the JSO Cold Case Unit to reopen and re-examine the case. In 2020, investigators re-examined the evidence found at the crime scene using updated technology. They found that the suspect's DNA profile matched to an inmate named David Nielsen Austin in the Michigan Corrections Database. The investigators then went to Michigan in April of 2021 to interview and collect more DNA from David to confirm the match. The tests confirmed the match, and in August of 2021, David was charged with first-degree murder, 2 counts of armed kidnapping, and 1 count of armed sexual battery in the case of Leslie McCrae. David is serving 2 life sentences for 2 other sexual assaults from 1988. David was never considered a suspect in this case before, and he had never been interviewed for the crime. He had lived in Jacksonville for only a short period of time and then moved to Michigan, where he committed the 2 crimes for which he was caught. Now, prosecutors are hoping David will be extradited to Florida soon to stand trial in Leslie's murder. Janet Stallcup was a 19-year-old nursing student living in Southern California in a city called Garden Grove. On December 19, 1976, Janet left her home to attend a friend's party in nearby Santa Ana. She would never make it to that party. She was reported missing. Police launched the search for her, but it took 8 days for her body to eventually be found. Her body was found in the front seat of her own car about 2.5 miles from her apartment. An autopsy revealed that she had been sexually assaulted, and the cause of death was strangulation. Investigators believed that Janet was likely abducted as she was getting into her car. The investigators worked tirelessly but could not find any leads or potential suspects, and therefore the case went cold. In 2002, the Orange County Crime Lab was finally able to isolate a single male sequence of DNA from the swabs collected at the crime scene. This DNA profile was entered into the CODIS database, but unfortunately, it did not produce a match. Then, in 2020, Garden Grove Police asked the Orange County District Attorney's Office to use genetic genealogy to find a potential suspect. Using this technique, DNA samples submitted by relatives of a possible suspect can be matched to samples taken from the crime scene. By using familial DNA tracking, this technique can link a person, even if their DNA has not actually been submitted in the database, simply by that of a cousin or an aunt, however far removed. Utilizing this procedure, on July 14, 2021, investigators were finally able to link one Terry Dean Hawkins to the crime scene. Well, Terry Dean Hawkins was determined to be responsible for Janet Stallcup's sexual assault and murder. He could not be charged, as he died in prison in 1977, just 1 year after his crime. His body was buried in the same cemetery where Janet is currently buried. Terry worked as a mechanic and lived in Garden Grove. He had an extensive criminal record, which included drug and weapons-related crimes. Convicted of a DUI and of indecent exposure, he was also charged with the 1975 killing of a 30-year-old woman in Laguna Hills, but he was never convicted for it, and the case was later dismissed. On July 4, 1977, he was arrested in Newport Beach on suspicion of disorderly conduct and drug-related offenses. He died of an overdose in the Orange County Jail the following day. Janet's family does not believe Janet knew Terry, and while the killer, just like his victim, has been long gone from this earth, Janet's family may find some peace in the answers that DNA technology have brought, as after 44 years, the case was finally solved. On December 20th, 1976, a dismembered body of a female was found in Carbon County, Pennsylvania, near Interstate 80 by the bank of Lehigh River. The woman had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. In what some detectives called overkill, after her death, the victim was then shot in the neck. During the autopsy, it was determined that the victim was in fact 9 months pregnant, and her nearly full-term unborn child had also died during the attack. The victim's body had been dismembered with a serrated blade. Her ears, nose, and breasts were severed and have never been recovered. Her other severed body parts were found inside 3 suitcases, along with the fetus that had been removed before the dismemberment. 2 of the suitcases were striped with red, blue, and white, while the other was tan with a plaid design. The suitcase handles had been removed and appeared to have been spray-painted black at some point. 1 suitcase contained her torso, the second contained her arms and legs, and the third contained her head and fetus. The police believe that the suitcases were thrown out of a moving vehicle into the Lehigh River below. The killer had probably hoped the suitcases would sink in the water. However, one of the suitcases ended up on the riverbank. A 14-year-old boy found the suitcase with the remains in it while playing near the river's edge. Police soon found the other 2 suitcases in the woods, about 20 feet away from the riverbank. The police took the body to Nat and Houghton Hospital for examination. On December 23, 1976, after 3 hours of examination, it was determined that the victim had been a white female in her late teenage years, or possibly early 20s. She was pregnant with a daughter who seemed to have been due any day prior to her untimely death. The victim's identity was unable to be determined, and she was named Beth Doe by police. The victim's fingerprints were taken and were submitted to the FBI. However, it did not match anyone in the national database. Her teeth were examined and recorded in dental records. A composite sketch of the victim was made and was distributed throughout the country. However, no credible leads could be found. She was buried in 1983 under the name Beth Doe. In 2007, her body was exhumed for further forensic analysis, and a new facial reconstruction was also made. However, police were unable to match it to any missing person. In November of 2020, Beth Doe's DNA was entered into a public database of genetic genealogy. Soon, familial DNA eventually led investigators to the victim's nephew, Luis Colon Jr. Luis put police in touch with other family members, including the victim's brother. On March 31, 2021, Beth Doe was finally identified as Evan Colon. In 1976, Evelyn was living with her then-boyfriend, 19-year-old Luis Sierra. Her family said in 1976, when Evelyn was 8 or 9 months pregnant with Luis's baby, they lost all contact with her. They said that in December of 1976, they had visited Evelyn's apartment in Jersey City, New Jersey, where she stayed with Luis. But after reaching the apartment, they found it abandoned, and they soon received a letter stating that the couple had moved to Connecticut and that Evelyn had delivered her daughter and was happy. The letter said that she would contact them if she needed anything. The family, thinking Evelyn had decided to live her own life, did not file a missing persons report. The family told investigators that Luis was abusive and jealous towards Evelyn, and often kept her locked inside the apartment. Evelyn even told her mother that she feared Luis, and that if anything happened to her, then Luis was likely involved. After decades of uncertainty on both the part of investigators and family alike, Evelyn's body received an official marker with her true name. Evelyn's identification brought to light the identity of her baby, who never got a chance to live but was nevertheless already named and loved. The name her mother had chosen for her in happier days was Emily Grace, and her identification was finally able to be added to the gravesite next to the name of the only adult that she ever knew, her first and only home, her mother. Luis was arrested and charged with murder. At the time of his arrest, he was 63 years old and residing in Ozone Park, New York. He is being held without bail and is awaiting extradition to Pennsylvania for Evelyn's murder. No other details regarding his arrest have been made public.